Hello everyone, thank you for coming tonight. We have a nice little audience, a little intimate audience here, and intimate panel, and a little bit socially distanced, so that's all good news. Today is September 2nd, and we have invited 3 of Freeman Butts' models to come and have a conversation with us. The general gist of the conversation is going to be about his role in his impact on the arts community in Livingston and his impact on everyone's lives who were touched by him, because he apparently was a very big person in people's lives. He lived large and he was a big heart and that kind of thing. I did not ever meet him, and I'm feeling very sad about that, just because everyone always speaks of him with a smile on their face. So, super quick biography, and please correct me when I'm wrong. He was born in 1928. He died in 1998. He was 70. He was born and raised in LA, attended an art school down there, the Hollywood School of Art, or something a little bit like that. And he worked for Disney for a time, and then he made his way to Montana. He spent some time in Bozeman, and then his last years he spent here in Livingston, and that's why we're really, really interested in him, because he brings with him all this artistic legacy, but then also he was somebody, it seems, who really understood community, and we're all about understanding the intersection between community and art. So, with that, I would like to start with you and have you just introduce yourself, and just super quick so we can go through all 3 at the beginning. How did you know Freeman, and when did you know him?
My name is Nancy Kessler. I modeled for Freeman starting in 1994. I was probably his very last model. I met him through another one of his models, Christy the Wordsmith. I had known him for a couple of years before I became brave enough to model for him, and it was one of the best things I had done.
Lovely. Amber?
My name is Amber Jean, and I met Freeman in my teens through Ray Compa at the high school in Bozeman. Started modeling for him then, and then our friendship grew. I mean, it began the very first time I met him and modeled for him, but it really deepened and grew. He became a big, influential figure and dear soul in my life, and what a blessing of it as a being.
Tandy?
My name's Tandy Miles Riddle, and I don't remember what year I met Freeman, but it was maybe 30 years ago, or 30 years, yeah. I mean, I knew him for 30 years, so, which was, I can't believe he died in 98, that just doesn't seem right.
Yeah.
But I keep thinking we're going to figure out that's wrong.
Right.
But yeah, I met him. When I met him, I heard about Amber as in high school, and it was through Ray Campo, and I was the resident artist here, which means that I lived here.
She means here in the
In this building.
Yeah.
Like right where I'm sitting right now, I kind of had a bedroll. And like people would come, if someone came in the door inadvertently at the wrong time, I would like jump up and run to the bathroom to get dressed. And that was when Parks was the director, and he would be gone for a couple of months in the winter back to North Carolina. And I, when the cat is away, the mice will play. And I thought, I can have whatever show I want. And I talked to Ray, and he said, well, I know who you should show. And that was Freeman. So I gave Freeman his first show here. But I was like, a very fledgling person. Like, I was meeting kind of, my background is through, I have artists in my background, and I had waited all my life up until that point to meet someone whom I wasn't related to that that saw art in the same way that I did. That was like inspiring to me. And he, as it turns out, just in addition to being as great as he is, he was also wonderful. I mean, he was also so kind. And so, you know, he wasn't big, like you were saying, he was also kind of a giant. He was a very big persona, you know, like, and you felt when his warmth, you know, when you were with him, like, you were fine.
He just exuded
He
kindness
exuded it.
and comfort.
Yeah.
There is a long list of people who have modeled for him, and is that because he was, today we would say, a safe person to be around, but also warm and generous? I mean, was it him? Were people attracted to him, or were they attracted to what he was doing with his art?
Well, I mean, so he was incredibly prolific.
Mm-hmm.
Like I mean, I know Amber's really prolific, and I feel like I'm pretty prolific, and Freeman puts us to shame. You know, like he worked all the time.
Yeah.
So he was always looking for models. You know?
Right.
So the word was out.
So that was one part of it. But there was a lot of women who modeled for Freeman who never modeled for anybody else.
That's true.
And they never set out to be a model, and they never wanted to model for anybody else. But the experience, the experience and the friendship and the presence and I think the opportunity. I just think it was those, and I think a lot of them felt comfortable because of who they knew. So like I told Crispy the wordsmith, you know, you could tell your friends. And the other thing is you could bring your friends.
Mm-hmm.
So like somebody who didn't think that they wanted to model but was interested in this opportunity or heard me talking about this person, or was a student like I was who needed money, you know, which was like, I couldn't even believe I got paid. Like, I really couldn't, because not only did you get paid, but you had this experience of,
It's like a master class.
yeah, I mean, you got to watch this artist passionately play with paint. But also Daisy was a big part of Freeman. His wife Daisy, and the way that the way their home and studio was when I was modeling for them in the very beginning in Bozeman, was on downtown Main Street, and they had built this wall that didn't go all the way to the ceiling in the apartment. It was above what was then the Thirsty Ear, and so you could talk and back and forth. So Daisy could be like, "Do you like blah blah blah, you know, music?" And you're like, "Yeah, oh, that's it," whatever. So she'd play what she wanted to play, and then she would like, they would feed you got food, you know. Once she found out I needed cranberry juice for a bladder infection once, there was always cranberry juice when I arrived, you know, because it wasn't something I could afford as a student. So, yeah, and then in the end you got money, which seemed crazy.
Well, I never got paid by Freeman, except in art. Piece.
There were people who didn't.
And I wasn't looking for the payment. I know he was just looking for new people to model once they had moved here to Livingston. And as I said, you know, I knew Christy, and I am not exactly a svelte woman, or maybe I am svelte. I'm not, you know. I'm very self-conscious, as most people have body self-consciousness, and Christy and I talked a lot about that. I said, well, you know, I'm way too big to take my clothes off in front of somebody. And she said, it's the most comfortable thing I've ever experienced. And, you know, I went and met Freeman, and he said, well, you don't have to be naked. You know, I've got stuff. And it just cracked me up that here's this giant teddy bear of a man who had a closet filled with sexy lingerie.
So, you know, actually, the sexy lingerie, the closet, it was Daisy's closet, and it was one of those hanging behind the door shoe racks that you stuff shoes in, but he didn't have that lingerie originally. What happened was, what's her name, the big benefactor who was alive in Billings at the museum, for the museum, who bought and donated art to the Yale Arts.
No.
The one who was also a painter, like, no, not Melchi.
No,
Or Sample?
no, she was in Miriam Sample.
Miriam
Sample. Miriam Sample was a huge benefactor of the arts and of the contemporary arts. And in fact, the contemporary arts was still sometimes, wasn't exactly, it was accepted across the state. Yellowstone art museum was different, but she would buy art and donate it to the museum. The only thing she didn't buy and donate to the museum was nudes. She just couldn't quite get herself to donate a nude. And Freeman hadn't busted in. There's like this, wonderful thing when you have a piece donated to a permanent collection of the State Museum that he supported in every other way. He donated art to all their auctions and all that kind of thing. But he didn't have a piece donated by her. So he went out. Actually, it was a piece of Daisy's lingerie that a model wore the first time. And then he and Daisy would go find lingerie, and they would go get it at Saks Fifth Avenue, Thrift Avenue, that kind of thing. In Bozeman, they would collect lingerie, and they were stuffed in these little things. So then it was this thing. And Freeman loved color, obviously. So the color part was fun to him, and the really ironic and super fun thing that he would just giggle about, because this huge, ginormous man could totally giggle. I mean, you'd giggle when he would just let out a laugh. Was the fact that the paintings with the lingerie turned out to be the most erotic, sexy paintings.
Right.
Really. But Miriam Sample bought one like that and donated it. And he'd giggle about that too, which was really funny. Yeah.
Well,
yeah.
I'm sorry.
Well, I think that women and some men also wanted to model for him because they loved his art. Like it was, there was kind of, it's almost like it's alive, and so I want to be part of that. And he would ask most people, but I also think that he really much preferred larger women. And a lot of artists do, most artists do actually. That is not a negative. It was more of a negative to try to deal with people who were more slender.
Yeah. Well, what I found after the first couple of times having the lingerie on, he made me so comfortable, and because of the way that he worked, he drew or painted so rapidly. I mean, he would do in an hour sitting 30, 40 pieces easily, and
Mostly works on paper. Right?
Works on paper, and he would do works on paper of a model for a while before he would paint them. He really wanted to get to know them, see how they moved and how they sat and what have you. And because he would just talk the entire time, not about art, not about your body, we would talk politics, we would talk about his family history and the clowns. I mean, one of you must know more about than I remember about the circus in his background.
Let's set that. So Freeman's.
I just want to make sure that Nancy's done with her.
But what she's talking about is that.
Oh, okay.
That is his grandparents on one side were in the circus.
Right.
Okay.
And so he had like a lot of the memorabilia of that.
Right.
It was very.
And he would talk about these things, and so I would be unaware of the fact that he was drawing. He would just say, okay, hold it. And he never had to hold a pose for very long, which was a really good thing. So I was terrified of falling over. And he just enjoyed interacting with you as a person. And it was almost like he was two people there. He would be talking to the person, and the artist would be working. And so I became so comfortable and completely at ease being butt naked in front of a man who was old enough to be my grandfather. And I was 40 years old when I started modeling for him. So he was remarkable in that sense. And it was so fun. I would always learn so much. And then at the end of every session, Daisy would come in. Little Daisy was, very petite woman, would come in with a tray of tea and cookies for you. It was just lovely.
That makes me think of the, Amber, you brought in the palette.
Oh, yeah.
I did.
Where's
I
the-
said, I don't know.
Oh, is it right over there? Yeah, we just got that. Thanks, Raymond. When Raymond and Amber showed up tonight, I thought they were bringing a tray of cookies or brownies, but it was actually was actually Freeman's.
So, I mean, this wasn't his palette, as in it was one of his many palettes. But he was tickled because when the school here was being dismantled, he got a whole bunch of these free cafeteria trays, stacks of free cafeteria trays, and it tickled him that he got them free. So when he would start, there would be sections like a cafeteria tray, you know, and he would actually kind of have it, and then eventually it would just get to be too wieldy, and just, I mean, literally, how
It's several pounds. It's in the pounds,
This thing
for
is
sure.
like,
Yeah.
it's like.
I would say 20 pounds.
Yeah, no, it's not quite that, but
It's
you
probably
guys,
a good 5
it's be
pounds.
kind of fun, just
Yeah.
be careful, I mean,
It's
your
heavy.
toes.
Is that acrylic?
It's all acrylic, yeah. He originally started with oils, and then there was a health issue thing, and he was really worried about switching to acrylics. And
And he
then,
loved to go.
but then, yeah, after they got that,
Man.
But he worked in so many mediums. I mean, he worked in pen and ink, he worked in pencil, he worked in charcoal, he worked in pastel.
Bronzes.
clay bronze.
Right,
Clay
right, but I
and
mean, just
bronze,
in
yeah.
terms of the, if you were modeling for him, if you
Oh, I
had
see
to,
what you mean.
what, you know, well, what are you working in
But
today?
he would work in clay with a model.
With
as
a
well.
model. Right, no.
So he would actually, that was a question I had, was, because there's a bronze behind you there where it's the model taking her blouse off. It's almost abstracted because you can't see the hands or the arms or the head. But he would do that live with you right there.
Yes, he would, although I'm pretty certain that's Daisy.
It is.
And the
Oh, no,
idea
it's,
of.
it's actually, it's Campo, it's K.
Okay, because, so that's an exception, because he was really respectful about the not undressing. There's a certain, like, there's a fine protocol between taking your clothes off in front of somebody and dropping a robe and being drawn or painted, right? So there's a little bit, I mean, even as informal as the sessions would be, and as open and free and as they would be, there was still, well, Daisy also had a few beautiful robes. So you would go in undressed and have it put on one of the robes, and then, so the idea of, so that piece, there was one series of paintings of Kay and Ray Campo and Kay that broke some of those rules, but they were like best friends, family, but otherwise I don't think you'll see any
It
pieces.
took years for them. They talked about it for years before they did it, and then Freeman said it was really uncomfortable.
Oh, was it? Oh, fine.
But he was happy to do it. I mean, but it was like, that was a one-off.
Yeah, so that's, yeah.
Yeah.
Interesting.
And you know, as we're talking, I'm realizing that I think a lot of what Freeman did, and what I do with because and you know the stores that we do life drawing a lot, and I am very cognizant of making the people comfortable, of the model
Yes.
being comfortable, and that was Freeman. Like you were saying, you know, so if you had a model that didn't care at all, then he didn't care at all.
Yeah.
But he set it up for it to be, that you would be comfortable.
I've noticed that about the wife's drawing
Yeah.
sessions that you facilitate, that
Yeah.
you're very conscious of that,
You know, and I guess what Freeman kind of taught me.
yeah. Yeah,
Sure.
interesting. What, as an artist, do you think that you've taken from him? I mean, I have my own observations about the way you paint, and there's a lot of similarity in the looseness and the lines, and
Well,
to some extent the quickness. I'm curious what you see.
It's just sort of interesting. There's a part, I remember one time Freeman got really angry at me, and he said, "I know you're stealing from me." And I was like, I am not, you know. I mean, it wasn't really like that. It was, we were just talking about it. And he would say, "Don't think I don't know that you paint like I do." And I said, and I still say, that there's a big overlap in how what inspires me, and what inspired me, I feel. And also in the directness, the method of painting. But I can't, any more than he can't paint any other way than he paints, I can't paint any other way than I paint.
Right.
And we're both in that boat. And so, actually, ironically, one of the last conversations I had with him, we were both weeping, and I was saying, you know, there's a lot of people who love you a lot, and you've done so much for so many people, especially you, really. And, but you're living through me in some way, and I take it really seriously, you know, like I don't, but not that I'm copying him.
Yeah.
You know, obviously, like, I don't think my work doesn't really look exactly like Freeman.
No, it doesn't.
But the honor of how he worked, I embrace and to, you know, and will try to be true to.
You are.
Oh, thank you. I try.
Amber, do you have any thoughts on his artistic influence on your art?
On my art.
Or maybe it's not an artistic influence, maybe it's another influence on your art.
You know, listening to Tandy talk, she just kept using the word working and the way we work and the way we work and working, you know. And Freeman, he would always ask, "Are you working?"
Mm-hmm.
Like whatever's going on, there would be a lot of questions about this and that. And you know, we met when I was 17, and you know, I was putting myself through school, and I had no financial support whatsoever, and I was living, you know, on it. I mean, it was just like, so it was this, and he loved all the stories and everything, but he would, whatever was going on, whatever, didn't matter, whatever, or boy troubles, whatever, he was there, like seriously, whatever that was, he was always got back to, are you working? Not with judgment, more with joy. And the most interesting thing to me about the question, "Are you working?" which is written in my studio on the wall, is on a picture of Freeman, is that his way of working was the most playful way. So it's that fine juxtaposition between work and play. And how that influences my thing. I feel like I came at art with this really hard work ethic. Like, that sometimes the playful part is the part that I loved. I need to remind myself. It's the words are you working? But the spirit is, are you playing? Are you tapping into your passion? Are you being true to yourself?
I think you're right, it's the tapping into the passion, because Freeman was such a passionate person, and he had such joy, such passion when he was working. For him, it wasn't work, it was truly just an explosion of creativity and output, and you know, there were times when he didn't like what he was producing in the drawings, but I never saw him rip a drawing up. Never saw him throw anything away. I know he did after. You know, he was, I said, "What are you doing? Pardon me, what are you doing with all of these drawings?" And he said, "Some just don't make it into the drawer, you know, some." But generally, I mean, that's why there are thousands and thousands and thousands of Freeman Butts drawings and hundreds of paintings, if not thousands. Because he always thought that there was something worthwhile to see, even if you made a mistake. There was something, you were expressing yourself, and expression was huge for him, I think.
He's certainly an expressionist.
Yeah.
We've had some discussions about what category does he fall into, but that's something art historians do. Maybe it doesn't matter. He did what he did, but he's certainly an expressionist.
Yeah.
And what is it that you got, since you all spent so much time with him, and it sounds like there was a lot of conversation, do you have a sense of what drove him? So there's are you working? And for you that meant to some degree, for you Amber, it meant to some degree a work ethic, but he meant it with some joy.
Him. Yeah,
Right.
Part was
So what,
yeah.
is there something inside? Like I know some artists and they're working out their demons, or sometimes it's just a compulsion. You can't help but just create things. Is there anything like that you could?
I really do think that he saw time, like, even before he was ill, that he hoped he had enough time to complete all the work that he wanted to do.
Right.
And it would be, like, that would be hard.
And he
So,
didn't.
No.
He never felt like, I don't, yeah.
But
Is that a goal that he would have ever achieved? I mean,
well, it's not,
What do
it's
you
not
mean?
the only one. I mean, I think that's a thing that artists feel.
Right.
That as you get better, you get more capable of doing some of the things that you might have envisioned that you could do when you were younger, or that you have the wherewithal to do, like, Close, what's his name that just died?
Chuck Close.
Chuck Close, he was talking about that when he got ill, after he had a stroke, he had come to a place in his life when he was able to, he could afford to retrofit his studio with a wheelchair, whereas it would have been really hard for a different artist at a different time. And so somehow that, as you get, like Freeman, moving to Montana was a really great thing for him as an artist. And it gave him sort of this time and energy, but he also started Bozeman Bronze, I believe, so that he would have the wherewithal to buy materials so that he could complete the paintings that he was working all the time to be completed.
Yeah, he was a driven artist, and most successful.
With joy.
So many-
With joy.
With joy, right, but he had to, he had to create. That was almost part of his breathing, I would say. If he wasn't doing something creative, he wasn't doing what he was supposed to be doing. So, but he also needed to bring joy to other people. He wanted his models to be happy. He wanted to, be part of the community with people. His love of Daisy was just amazing. They were so cute together. And
I think you could kind of go back to saying it was about love. And it wasn't necessarily about working and creating, and that was just part of it, but he loved life.
yes,
He had time. He made time for his loves, which was Daisy, which was people. Whether he barely knew you or not, you could come in. If you heard of him or somebody say, I think the door would be open, right? The door would be open, and so it's like when you say he lived or he was driven or that, then sometimes I think you might have that storied idea of the artist who's like driven, and he had time. He raised 5 children, or he married Daisy with her 3 children, and that was a big part of his life. And he did things with them, for them, and that kind of thing. I don't think he wasn't the kind of like close the door and drive. He had, he could be really prolific in 2 hours. That was a lot, And so it wasn't like that crazy. Not that anybody said it was that. It's just that it was another way of living and loving, and it was one of the ways that we get to see, because it was a materialistic expression of that.
And there wasn't like a line between it.
No,
right.
That was like part of the whole.
Exactly, so it's the continuum of his life.
food.
Food.
Oh, food. And food. He could just tell you about a meal he had 15 years ago, like in his chair, back in his big, huge, extra large recliner, and he could tell you about, and you would be listening to it, you could taste, and then he would would laugh when his feet would go off the floor, and he was just laughing at it, pure joy. It was like, like Winnie the Pooh and the honey jar. It was like Winnie Pooh and the honey jar, and you just wanted to squeeze him and get in the, chew, because it was that lovely of a memory,
Yeah.
And Daisy most of the time was in on the memory.
Oh, totally.
And also, the thing I was talking about, because it was kind of like this quest of getting all these paintings done, it was her job too. Like they were discussing that all the time.
Right.
And like when you came to see him, if you hadn't seen him for a while, you would be looking at all his new work. and other work that he had. He had collected a lot of work from a lot of artists.
Oh,
Yes.
very much.
Yeah.
Beautiful, interesting, wonderful.
It was fun. He was he was super supportive. Like that's the other part about. It was about seeing and viewing art, and there was never an art opening that Freeman and Daisy were. I mean, they would drive a snowstorm across the state to go to somebody's, and it didn't have to be somebody known or anything. It was just somebody having a show. They would show up, you know. And one time at the Yellowstone Art Museum, they had an annual auction, and Freeman, of course, always donated. He donated to anybody that asked for anything, and his painting had just come up. And it just sold. And then the next piece of art that came up, he bought. And the auctioneer actually said, there was an artist with however many dollars in his pockets for, you know, a minute and 20 seconds or whatever it was, you know, and it was just like boom, boom, like that. And he thought that was great too, you know. He had piled the art in his place, and that was another joyful thing is modeling, especially for me, an up-and-coming artist craving all of that, is that you were sitting amongst paintings, you know, floor to ceiling, you know, just all over, and the way the home was curated and the art was around you, it was another part of the experience that was just scrumptious, you know, for anybody, whether you were modeling or not, but that was also...
And then there would be a wonderful meal.
Of course, yeah. Food, too, would be part of it.
When he had a peer group of the Bozeman artists that they were all just so supportive of each other. Ray Campo and Ted Waddell and the Audio and Freeman and I don't know.
The
The
Deweeses.
or the Deweeses, yeah.
Yeah, they all had the kind of same joie de vivre and supported each other, which was wonderful.
Yeah.
And
He
he
taught me so
also,
much about local artists because of that, just, you know,
he
chatting.
was also always reading.
Yes.
And interested in talking about what he was reading and discovering new artists, and how he had this great, incredible collection of art books.
And music and movies.
Music and
And
movies, yes.
it was like, they
Thousands
would
of
always go to
albums
all the
in the background.
theaters.
Just all the best
Yeah,
stuff,
all
right?
the-
So he was just always doing things. He was
Mhm.
reading and talking and communicating, and in community, were there obviously there was quiet time to read, but he sounds like he was. You could imagine a whirlwind, or
No,
it
there was
wasn't that.
a kind of, that's the wrong, there was it's as if there were unlimited time and unlimited space.
Mm.
And so all of these things happen, not in a way that, you know, you have, although sometimes you'd be excited to tell him to share something with you,
But it was, he had energy, but not,
frenetic.
not frenetic energy, exactly. He was always doing, and he would sit and think, or sit and read, but there was always some kind of activity.
Well, I think it was more an engagement than an activity. It wasn't
Yeah.
necessarily physical at all.
Yes.
And he spent a lot of time just in the chair. And if somebody came, he gave them as many hours as they needed to talk. Like, literally, you know, I joked once that they should have the plaque on their door, kind of like Snoopy, the doctor is in, you know, whatever the therapist is in, because people will come with you, and they would get chocolate or cookie, whatever was there, but they would get time. It wasn't like, excuse me, or whatever. It would just, if it rolled into a meal, it rolled into a meal. If it was late at night, he had time. He just had that. So it wasn't necessarily about activity. You never felt rushed, and I don't feel like he ever rushed life. Any of it.
Right.
He was more about
Just connecting.
being present and enjoying it. It was a juiciness that wasn't a drive. It was a
An
passionate appreciation.
How long would a modeling session last? Because I know sometimes it can be an hour, or they could be longer.
When he was doing the drawings, so for me, he wanted to draw me, and he told me that he did this with many of his models. He would draw them for months, draw pastel, line, charcoal, whatever, until he felt comfortable to paint. So our sessions were 1 hour. He said once we started painting, they would be 2 hours or 3 hours if he really got into it. It just depended. And unfortunately, he finally had decided he was ready to paint me, and that's when he got sick. He got sick that week.
Oh, no.
We had an appointment for him to start painting of me, and he was never able to paint me. It's one of my great sadnesses, is that I never got to see Freeman paint me. You know, I never got to see the result of that.
So you had all the other experiences except for
Yeah.
that.
Yeah, so, when you ladies sat for him for paintings, were they longer sessions?
Initially, it was pretty consistently a 2-hour time frame, and the first time I ever modeled for him, the first hour he drew, and the second hour he did a painting, and then it was like, it would just depend. He usually drew for a few minutes, and then a lot of times it'd be a painting the first hour and a painting the second hour. But by the hour, it was also Freeman time, which was awesome. You know, it's like, you get there, you're talking,
Yeah.
what you need refreshments, then we go in, and whatever you work. So that hour wasn't like he was working on the clock for an hour. The paintings were all pre-stretched, the canvases were stacked
Yeah.
up. He had stacks
done a lot
of
of work to
blank
get that.
paper. He had a roll of like butcher block paper, like really wide, but also better quality papers that he had so he could rip it off. So if he wanted to do something big, you know, he could just turn to the wall and just do this thing and then just rip it. I love that sound. Rip it off, put it on the ground and do another thing. You know, he would just toss the paintings out so they could dry if they were works of on paper, you know. But you always had a break in the middle because Daisy had refreshments. So we go back over to the other side, you know, and then have chat, and then go back over and do another painting or whatever. And so it was usually typically around that. That was like the sort of formal thing that in the 14 years things were different towards the end.
And there was a point at which he moved from Bozeman to here, and so the studio setup was different.
Way different.
And did that change the vibe?
Yes, that dramatically.
Yeah.
Dramatically. In Bozeman, the vibe, this space was long like this, and the actual part of the model was in one half of their apartment was their living room and kitchen, and there was this long hallway that you went in. They split up, so you went in the hallway and you saw paintings, art, and then that wall was built to house the back of their bedroom. So the model, the studio, one-third of it was their bedroom, and the other 2/3 was his studio. So that was where the carpet was ripped off, and the third that was their bedroom was carpeted. So like we would be here in their bedroom, and here's all the closets and their comfortable things around them. And they had a king-size futon that rolled up, and he built a model stand. He
The model
covered it
stand
with,
that we have,
yeah.
it was their bed.
Yeah,
Oh, come on.
it was their bed, and he covered the whole thing with canvas. It was a shitty canvas that he bought that just didn't stretch right, but he stapled the whole thing so it was this comfortable thing. So when you went, he'd already rolled up their bedroll, their futon, and then you had this comfortable canvas, giant king-size model stand to stand on. You were surrounded by carpet, you were surrounded by their things. Their bookshelves were down low, so there could be more room for art, you know. But you were down low if you were sitting or laying down on the stand or whatever. And then the carpet ended there, and the studio started right there, and it was from there back, so it was super comfortable. And then when they moved to here, they had to pack up all of that stuff, and then when they moved here, it was a whole big separate building that you walked out into, and you know, it was a vacuous space. It didn't have that comfort.
And it
didn't have the brick walls
It was really
like this.
different, yeah. But it had advantages.
Oh, yeah.
Because it was so big.
Right.
Sure.
And
So it was
he
this
built
place.
shelves all around it, and he could just do, and he had great storage for all of his paintings, which before.
Closer by. They were like in the basement and
Yeah.
below,
Sure.
street level.
Yeah, so you trade some convenience for the,
But one of the main reasons he moved was because of the studio.
Yeah.
It was a dream to have that big space.
Yeah.
It really was.
He needed it. It was like
yeah.
it's like what I was talking about, like each time you get, more ability in your life, like all of a sudden he would be able to have done, had he not gotten sick, more work,
Yeah.
different, better, or, bigger.
Did his work change at all, do you think?
Yeah. His work was always changing.
Yeah.
You know,
That's true.
his work, he had series that he did, and his work was constantly changing. And one of the things that I remember happening really successfully after he moved to Livingston is that he did landscape paintings.
That's what I was going to say.
And he did nudes, and he loved those two things. And he did certain series in landscapes like silos and haystacks and stuff like that, kind of Monet like. But then he had the nudes. He kept them separate. When he moved there, he had this big space, and that was the first time he brought nudes and put them into the landscapes. And he was doing some of those on some really large canvases.
Yeah, really big.
And it was fun for him because he was able to bring his work in the paint. He and Daisy would take long drives and take all those pictures.
He was so much closer to the landscape here.
Yeah,
really.
than when he was on Main Street. But he had lived, out there at Sykes Canyon before, and then before he'd gone into it was harder to get models up there, so he moved into town. It was true.
Yeah.
That was like why he moved to town, because he wanted models.
Well, and gosh, their place, I mean, it was a dream place. That was the best
And he
part
loved
of
the
it.
landscape, but he couldn't get the models. And it was like, when you're in Montana, and there weren't as many people on the roads then and whatever,
Yeah.
so it's a thing.
So actually, I want to try an experiment, Henry. So what we've preloaded some pictures into the computer here, but they are all from the previous show. So basically here at the Danforth, we've had two shows. There's the one that's currently here that has a little bit of a retrospective element to it, in that we have paintings from the 50s, the 60s, the 80s. The previous show was just focused on figures. And I can explain the reasons for that later. But what you can see as I look at the as I look at the feed here is that you see a lot of the figures. You can't see the other things around us, but maybe Henry, you can share with our online audience some of the pictures from the previous show, which are all figures, but then maybe stop for a second on the one where there's a figure in the environment. Not that one. Although this is we took it down. We saved a couple, so excuse me if I'm a little confused. This is one that we've used before. We've got a couple models, red and black, very abstracted, but keeping the form, which is a fun way to go. This is the one I'm thinking of, which is, I don't know who it is, and we're not necessarily going to be sharing who the individual models are, but it was one of a woman squatting in a stream, and that's what you're talking about, where things started to change and you would actually go out, because everyone else was sitting in a chair or...
But he wouldn't go out there with them. He was bringing out, he would go out with Daisy and take photos. Lots of landscape photos.
Got it.
But then he would bring out he would do the painting of the landscape, and then when the model came, he would paint the model into the landscape.
Got it. Okay.
Yeah, but he just had more room to do that because he had the paintings around. So if he saw something he liked, he could compose that with that painting that's over there that he did. It was, and he had stacks. He had drawers and stacks of these prints of these landscapes. So that's how he did that series. I don't know. That was just one of the things that I remember.
And some really large
spaces.
pieces.
Yeah, and the large.
And the biggest one we have in our collection is the self-portrait with the silos in the background. He's wearing his overalls that are covered in paint. That's a really fun one.
It's also part of that series.
Okay.
It's a figure in a landscape, and that was painted, I'm sure, here this time. Once he moved over here, that was part of that series.
For some reason, that reminds me of how much we all loved his overalls.
Oh yeah. Oh, I was gonna bring a pair. I forgot to bring them tonight. I was gonna bring.
The only thing I had ever saw him wear, the only thing I ever saw him in was overalls.
He had his clean pair for the art auctions for the dress-up things. He had the ones without paint on them for dress-up events, but he had some that were like that palette that could stand up by themselves. When they got too uncomfortable and phone too heavy, you know, that's when,
And he had several pair.
Yeah.
yeah,
Fun.
yeah,
That's fun.
yeah.
Oh.
Yeah, there's there's one story that I think represents a little bit of the kind of person that Freeman was, that happened when he was on Main Street. Because the place that he and Daisy lived on in Bozeman was literally downtown on Main Street. I happened to also live at the time downtown on Main Street in another block down, but across, he was on the second level, and across the street from him was, I don't know if I should name names, but he was a designer. He was a designer. He had a design firm. He did design things for people. He designed things for people. And Freeman happened to notice. Actually, this story was told originally to me by the designer, and then I asked Freeman about it. And so I got the two versions of the same story.
I heard from both of them as well.
Did you? Yeah. But I just think it kind of explained, I don't know, so this guy he had a huge commission, he'd been working really, 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 really hard on this piece, hours and hours and hours to get this design right, and it involved painting, but it wasn't loose kind of painting, it was very, very technical, designerly painting, you know. And Freeman and Daisy would stay up all hours of the night, like hours, they didn't have a real regular schedule, and they, you know, some of the best crazy weird movies came on in the middle of the night or whatever, so they'd be watching those, you know, whatever. But he noticed that this guy was up way, 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 way late into the night, and his lights were on, and this fella who'd been working on this piece for a long, several cups of coffee, brewed himself another cup of coffee, came back, accidentally spilled his coffee over the piece.
Oh.
Over the whole piece. And it was like hours, just a few hours from the deadline, which was going to be morning, right? And he was just devastated. And he got up and and Freeman happened to witness across Main Street, Bozeman, this happened. Yeah, and yeah, it's like, yeah, that's like the most urban part you could be, like to live on Main Street. I felt very urban because I lived on Main Street, you know, like upstairs, bathroom down the hall, you know, and there's not too many places you can live urban like in Montana, but that was it. And so here's Freeman, and he sees this guy totally lose it, rip it, just for everything. He's like, no, he's devastated. He gets a phone call. He's just like, what? He's getting a phone call. It's like 3:30 in the morning or 4 or whatever it is, and he answers the phone, and it's Freeman. And he said, okay, he's like, take it, this is Freeman, Professor, take a breath. I saw what happened. He's like, it's over, it's all over. He says, it's not over. He said, can I come over? And Freeman went over across the street in the middle of the night, close to morning, and it's hard to tell the story and just not say names, but he was so, and he's like, it's over, it's done, it's irreparable, we can't repair it. And Freeman says, we don't need to repair it. Meanwhile, Freeman's putting out a new fresh piece of giant paper, and Freeman says to him very simply, you've already done all the work. You've already done this piece. Let's finish. And they just started it, and they finished that painting in time for the deadline. Together. They finished the design together. But Freeman said, you've already done the work, right? And he said he never, ever, ever forgot that. They just stayed up together and yeah.
Wonderful.
But calm.
Yeah.
Just that was Freeman. Like,
yeah.
He didn't get upset. He got excited. You know.
Kind of zen-like.
And
yeah.
it also exemplifies how much he cared about people.
Yeah, and
then he was willing to go, to really be there, really listen, sometimes is incredible. And to the most weirdest people sometimes.
It didn't matter who you were, what you were doing, or what your art was. There wasn't judgment there. Not that you couldn't do an honest critique if you asked for one, but there was never that judgment. And that was, I think, something that everybody reveled in.
He was just so accepting in that way. I mean, he would, another friend of mine who was a model, was going through a very bad situation, came to model for him one day, and he never picked up a brush or a pencil. He just sat there and talked, because that's what the person needed. Yeah. You know, that he was just there for people the way. He heard a whole lot of my unhappy love stories. So. said, do you want me to tell you to get rid of the eye? And I'm like, oh, that's what I should do. I said, no, I'm not gonna tell you, you have to decide that, but, you know, it was.
I'm going to drive this back toward the art. I'm wrestling a little bit with whether to take the conversation, because we're talking about the man, we're talking about the people he loved, his wife, his models, his friends, and the impact on all of them. I am curious about, does he have, and what is his legacy artistically? I'll say in Montana, I'll say in this community, just sort of larger.
It's interesting.
And maybe to sort of get your ire up a little bit in order to poke a little and get a response. I was upstairs here at the Danforth paying bills one day this summer, and the window was open because it was warm, and we had some tourists walking by. The gallery was closed, and I heard a car pull up and park right in front, and some people get out, and the doors closing, and chit-chat to each other. And apparently, somebody had walked up and put their face up to the window and started laughing. Laughing. Guys, you gotta come see this, look at this. They come up, they all start laughing, and the woman's voice says, "That's not art." And so I use that because what we're dealing with is someone who tried on abstract expressionism and a lot of figurative work and landscapes. His work got looser and looser as time went by. It's definitely still art, but I'm curious, not everyone reacts the same way to it. Not really a question, more of a statement, and do you have a reaction to any of that?
Well, you can always say, you know, art is in the eye of the beholder, beauty is in the eye of the beholder. His work isn't going to be appreciated or even liked by everybody. I don't think he ever worried about it, but I think his abstract expressionism, his looseness really opened up things for a lot of people, you know, that you didn't have to be exact, you didn't have to be, you know, create exactly what you thought. You could let it happen. And I don't think he, correct me if you think I'm wrong, I don't think he cared if other people liked his work or not. Well, you know, I mean, every artist does, but it's not, it wasn't the impetus that he was painting for other people. He was painting for himself. And I think he expressed a lot of freedom in art that other artists, I think, appreciate.
Freedom, okay.
I think freedom's a really good word, and I think that to illustrate that, it would be this story that I don't remember him ever throwing anything away, so I'm not sure about of his own work, because he did that because he was that non-judgmental about it. And could look back at it, and he could say whether his piece was good or not. I mean, to himself, he could. And there was one curator that did a term in, I don't know, it wasn't a term, but there was a curator at the Yellowstone Art Museum for a while who had a habit of coming to pick out the painting that would go into the auction that year. And was very, and they made an appointment, this is a very big deal, and would insist on, so Freeman would take him down to the basement, all the way down, and go through rack after rack. We're talking these giant paintings, rack after, let him look at every single painting. Then they would come upstairs and have cookies and tea and stuff, and inevitably, after a number of years, Freeman realized that this curator would go, what about that piece? And it would be the piece that was on the easel. I want that one. And so Freeman, one year, once he figured this out, one year, he put a painting on the easel he wanted to get rid of that he thought wasn't good. Totally. So, I mean, that's the ego part and the freedom part that I think, because like, some people would be horrified if it was a painting that they personally, if an art, I would have a difficulty if it was a painting I didn't like personally, for it to go publicly to a museum and be in an auction and stuff. He didn't care about that at all. He was just, it was more that, it was the, he was saying, it was the delight. It was the delight. He wasn't trying to get rid of a painting. He wasn't trying to fool anybody. He was just, it was just,
let's see if this works.
this, and it totally did. And the same thing happened, and that guy insisted on that painting, you know? And, oh my God, we would just laughed about that. So that's, it's back to process and joy and the non-judgment and allowing of other people to see if they, and respond however they wanted to a piece, and whether they liked it or not, that didn't matter to him. And I think that's a legacy that honestly, if I could fully embrace that myself, would be the bomb, you know what I mean? And
I think that there is a thing, I mean, Freeman living here affected, I think, particularly all of the artists who saw his work. Like, it enabled an avenue, came into existence because of that, for all the reasons that we're talking about. Mm-hmm. But it is the work.
Yeah, and taking it back to the freedom, if you come back to place, Montana's a big space, and the art scene, there's a lot of people who come here because they love the bigness, and they respond, they have a real passion for that, and it's not, and they're you could say they're giving up that potential for instant notoriety or being seen or being in the scene, you know, and Freeman didn't care about that, and at the time he came, he was working contemporarily when there wasn't so much contemporary work, which gave it gave other people, whether you were an artist or a musician or whatever, it gave you that extra
response.
Yeah, there's a spark that comes from that fuels the rest of us to say, we can keep doing what I want to do. It doesn't have to. And he painted for a long, 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 long time before Montana recognized his paintings. And he was still human enough to be tickled when people bought pieces and they found homes and that kind of thing. Like he wasn't he wasn't human. I mean, or he was so detached, because there was nothing about detachment. It was more about that. But I think that paved the road. That didn't really pave anything. It more like allowed that flowing. It was an allowing for a lot of us that might have tended to just settle for painting trout in a fly fishing town. You know what I mean? But if you painted trout, he would not have
judge you for that.
And there's a million ways you could paint trout.
Yeah,
you
and
know?
he would talk about it.
He would still be like.
But that's not what he was interested in.
No, he was interested.
No, and he was interested in the work he was doing always, and that before anybody knew anything about him hardly, and then as people knew about him, that didn't really change. Mm-hmm. His path was already set somehow, you know, and it I think it started obviously before he came here. But I was thinking about, we were talking about raising 5 kids, that when he came here, it was, you know, the youngest daughter was able to come as well, but then they would talk about how she knew enough to leave them alone, to let them have their own life together more. And all of a sudden, coming to Montana was an opening for him. Like it broadened, it helped, his painting got better, you know, and I mean, he felt that.
Yeah.
Going back to the freedom that he expressed and other people have too, is it mine? I'm not a painter. I'm a painter of words. I'm a writer. And working with him, watching him, being with him, actually helped my writing open up. Freedom to make mistakes or say, well, you know, that sentence doesn't work, so let's do it. I mean, a writer does that anyway, but there was just an opening, not being so tight, so cramped, so by the rules. I hadn't thought of it until we were talking about what we would discuss tonight, but I realized that he really did help me just kind of loosen up my discussions of my boyfriend problems, it all. It helped loosen me, a little more freedom, a little more ability to express in a different way. So it wasn't just painting or music, but as you said, he really did affect.
Also, remember that Freeman, two things. When he was in California, he was very active in supporting the art scene where he lived. Like he did all, like what you're doing, he did. I mean, he worked in art galleries and art centers and did all the work. And that's part of his thing of going to every art opening. Like that was part of his method was to support other people. And then one year he spent a whole year playing the guitar. He stopped painting and played the guitar for a year when he was in California. And it was never, he's like, and I was totally happy. There was never a feeling like I should be painting. But then he was done. And he went back to painting.
Oh, great. You guys, thank you so very much. That is tremendous. I want to thank everybody who came in tonight. It turned into a nice little crowd. And I'd like to thank Henry Harrison for setting up all the technology. Oh my gosh. And we have a little bit of punch left over. We have some fizzy water we can share, but we'll probably open the door, and I think we're going to call it quits right there. All right. Thank you for joining us.
This was great. Thank you.